I'd like to invite the speakers for our next panel to the stage. We'll close out today's session with reflections from the U.S. Department of Education to discuss the lasting impact of ESSER investments on our education landscape. I'm pleased to introduce Roberto Rodríguez, Assistant Secretary for Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Education, where he leads the development and review of the department's budget and advises the Secretary on all matters related to policy development, implementation, and review. Roberto's distinguished career in public service includes senior government roles in the White House as Deputy Assistant for Education to President Barack Obama and in the U.S. Senate as Chief Counsel to the late Senator Edward M. Kennedy. Finally, Ray Hart, the Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools. Dr. Hart has more than 30 years of experience in research and evaluation and was previously the Director of Research for the Council. His work has spanned policy areas such as post-secondary success, college readiness, professional learning and school improvement, teacher effectiveness, and value-added analysis. Ray leads the Council and the support we provide to our 78-member urban school districts.
So good afternoon.
There we go.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Good.
Great. Just thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you for your time. And we've had a wonderful afternoon already discussing the benefits of the impact of the investments of ESSER funds in our schools, in our classrooms, also statewide. So we've had a number of different conversations today. One of our districts presented, and Andrew Stroke from Indianapolis mentioned the Education Recovery Scorecard. You may be familiar with that data. It was data that was a study that was conducted by researchers from Harvard and Stanford, where one of the researchers, Sean Reardon from Stanford, noted that the recovery was actually, quote, quite remarkable. And Andrew mentioned their recovery in their district. Some other districts have had recovery that was a half to two-thirds above what student recovery would be in a normal year. So how is the administration tracking and reflecting on the impact of these investments?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ray. It's great to be here with you in conversation. I should begin just by thanking you and your member districts for your leadership in fueling this recovery. Thank Carissa and all of the CCSSO members for your leadership in this recovery, and the broader coalition of our school principals and our state leaders and our partners who are on the front lines of both leading in this unprecedented disruption that was COVID-19, and more importantly, building back stronger and building back better, and to your point, Ray, from the Reardon research, building back quicker than we have seen previously. We don't always see that narrative come through, but it is important to note that last year's learning has helped us bridge that learning, that loss that we saw across the arc of the pandemic by over a third in math and by a quarter in reading. And so we know we are making progress here. And if we look at past years, it's at an even faster rate. It's remarkable. And yet we know a lot more needs to be done. We are first closely tracking the data, and with help from many of you from all of our states. And I know it's a big undertaking, but the investment in the American Rescue Plan was the largest single public investment we've seen in public education. And part of that is to really make sure we're following those dollars and tracking that data. At our COVID relief data.ed.gov, we have posted the plans that our states have done to follow those dollars, to trace those to improvements in mental health, improvements in student learning, in staffing, improvements. And we know how important these dollars were for building the infrastructure and rebuilding that infrastructure, keeping those doors open, buying that PPE, and keeping the safeguarding the health and safety of our students. So we want to be able to tell that story. We're in the midst of preparing our second report on ESSER, third year of reporting, which we'll have out later this spring. Now that data lags a couple of years, but in real time, we're also connecting with and learning from and building a coalition from the department forward of districts that are leading on evidence-based strategies that we know work to fuel this recovery, right? And those are, and you've talked about them already over the arc of the conference. It's how are we thinking about attendance and chronic absenteeism in more effective ways? How are we thinking about those interventions, those academic interventions, including high-quality tutoring, right, where we're able to provide 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes a session in small groups, the opportunity to target that reading and math improvement, and we've seen tremendous gains there, and opportunities to expand the school day and school year and those summer months and capitalize on that additional time that we have with our students to make up for that lost instruction. And again, there, across the country, in districts and states, we've seen remarkable progress. So, our job is to really, at the federal level, continue to be good stewards of these dollars, most importantly, partners with our state and local leaders, and build that evidence base alongside you around what works. And this is why the coalition is so important, right? Coming together at the beginning of this pandemic, but also so that through this recovery, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're tapping into what we see working in real time around the country and sharing that. And in education, that is often our biggest challenge, as we try to reinvent the wheel 15,000 times in 50 different places, rather than learning and lifting up what we know works and helping one another support its implementation.
So thank you. As I shared earlier, we've had great conversations. One, about the incredible investment, what it's meant to teachers in their classrooms. We heard from the state of North Carolina, for example, that they invested a significant amount of their ESSER funds into professional learning for teachers and other things. So tell us more about what you're seeing and hearing, the stories of impact that you'd like to share with the audience today that go beyond some of the stories we heard today. And we heard stories about high impact tutoring and other things. So what are some things that you've seen around the country that are things that we should consider investing in moving forward, continuing to invest in moving forward?
Yeah, well, I think so many bright spots that we're seeing. We are seeing that high dosage and high quality tutoring really pay off. I think I don't know if we have folks with us from Metro Nashville, but I know they've used that tutoring, over 7,000 families, posting the highest ever proficiency rates that they've seen in their district. That's an exciting development. We're seeing, Baltimore look at how they can bridge some of their effective strategies with their Title I dollars. And that's one thing you'll be seeing us continue to focus on moving forward, and hopefully in partnership with our state leaders and our local leaders, is how do we think about some of these other categorical investments and the title investments that you have through ESSA to continue to sustain, identify what works and continue to sustain what we know works there. The interventions around chronic absenteeism, even the nudges to parents that we've seen, reduce the rate of chronic absenteeism by 17%. Home visits, another really important and great opportunity. I know here in the district, that's a intervention that they've looked at using and continuing to scale. And then capitalizing on some of these summer months, we also see as really promising approaches there. We also think there's an opportunity to think about innovation here, so that we don't have to build back the same as we did pre-pandemic. The quality of our educational opportunity, the depth of learning that we're and the individualized and tailored instruction that we're seeing for students, we think can be built back in a more innovative way. Doesn't have to look like how we delivered things in March of 2020. So that's also thinking about how we utilize technology, for instance, in new ways. We have a new National Educational Technology Plan that really traces the contours of the digital divide and the digital access, design, and use gaps, but then also says, like, how do we think about utilizing ed tech tools in ways that individualize instruction and personalize learning more effectively, provide more formative assessment, and I think that the work around using diagnostic assessments and formative assessments in a bigger way, being more creative about how we measure student learning and track student progress. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we have to meet our learners where they are and trace a path forward for each of them, right, with new data that we sometimes didn't have from a summative assessment. So, I think just hats off to the country who's really, fueling this. And I'll just observe, we were not alone as a country in the challenges that this pandemic brought, right? And I had the opportunity to lead our delegation to the Skills Summit for OECD recently, and sit with some ministers from around the world who really remarked on just how challenging the pandemic was. We saw dips on the PISA in mathematics and in reading. But I think, I am proud of the recovery that we've already begun to mount as a country. And I think our challenge today is in continuing to double down on those strategies we know work best, and then building the funding to continue to implement those strategies. And that gets into the budget that the president recently rolled out and what we're hoping to press in Congress to make sure that our public education system has the resources they need to get the job fully done.
So thank you for talking about innovation and technology and all the wonderful things that you've talked about, and just in terms of investments. As a matter of fact, one of the presentations was about using technology and the lessons that we learned from the pandemic to increase high school credits for students during the school year. In North Carolina, they talked about mandating summer school programs for students coming out of the pandemic to help improve. And so I think a lot of those things are things that we can still look at as continuing to do. And you mentioned having the investments and being able to do those. So in looking at those investments, what role do you see the U.S. Department of Education playing as ESSER funds sunset in September in helping to support our states, our schools, and our school districts in really continuing some of those things that we've learned have worked well for us?
Yeah, and I'll just say, one of the other things as I reflect on that question, Ray, that I think we also have seen coming out of this pandemic is a focus more intently on the whole child and the needs of the whole child, the comprehensive needs, the social and emotional needs of our kids, and the connection of that to the science of learning and to their academic progress in a much more front and center way than I think as policymakers and as system leaders we have in the past. So that's also very, very exciting, right? I think if we have the opportunity to build a mental health infrastructure that meets our kids where they are, we know they're 6 times more likely to access those mental health services if those are in schools. So we need to think about how we build the funding mechanisms to sustain this work moving forward, right? And when you think about mental health, for instance, the president's work around the bipartisan Safer Communities Act and the $2 billion that piece of legislation delivered to support high-quality, well-rounded education in our communities through stronger connections, to bring 14,000 new mental health professionals into our schools, our social workers, our psychologists, our student support coaches, others. So, we have a set of investments there. I think what we need to do is make sure we're continuing to build the base, right? We have worked hard, and fortunately with support from Congress, have been able to, over the last few years, build an additional nearly $2 billion into the base of Title I. Build an additional $1.5 billion into the base of IDEA. Bring $95 million additional dollars to our discretionary programs to build the pipeline and prime the pipeline of teacher preparation and teacher development and advancement through our discretionary programs. These are critical investments, right? We have to reverse what we've seen as a trend coming in of underinvestment in our public education system. So we're going to continue to focus on that effort. The president's budget is a bold vision for where we go with our education system. It is a vision that prioritizes education on the country's domestic priorities list. It's a 4% increase over last year's budget. It makes important and calls for important investments in Title I, in our Title III program for our English learners, in IDEA, in building on the five-fold increase that we've been able to realize in full-service community schools, for instance. It calls for this academic acceleration initiative on the mandatory side of the budget. We believe that should be a permanent fund for our districts and our states to be able to tap into to sustain some of these investments in tutoring and in addressing chronic absenteeism and expanding learning time. We believe that we also need to usher in those investments on the innovation side of things so that we're building on building up a new vision for what our high schools can and should deliver for our students, right? Which is not just about making sure that they're mastering college and career-ready standards by 12th grade, but that they have that career advising and that opportunities for dual enrollment in early college credit and early credential progress and work-based learning outside of their school and opportunities to, engage in internships and project-based learning and all of these pieces in our career-connected high schools vision that we've been able to realize in 19 communities, but we have hundreds of communities that are ready to take up that mantle. So, I think our work here is in doing more to make sure that Congress prioritizes education, sustains those investments. We are waiting with bated breath for an FY24 bill from Congress that hopefully will continue those investments forward, and we're all going to have to work together to make sure that we continue to prioritize education.
So we'll wrap up on this last question. On our last panel, we had a teacher, a wonderful teacher from Vermont, who shared with us that the unfinished learning needs of our kids and the recovery from the pandemic for our students is not over. And she shared that it will continue. As individuals here return to their respective states, schools, classrooms, what would you like to leave them with? What are the things that you can share that they can take back as they still continue to address the unfinished learning needs that our students have, both from a, as you mentioned, mental health, social emotional perspective, but as well as the academic needs that students have?
I would say we have the answers. We know what our kids need to be able to succeed and thrive. We've already proven that we can recover stronger from this pandemic. What we need to do is to carry that vision, that resolve, that determination forward. We need to know that the policy community here in Washington, D.C. has your back on that effort. We're going to continue to push forward those funds. We still have ESSER dollars in the system, right? Our ESSER, our ARP ESSER dollars, we are about in the 65, 68%. But we have there are more dollars still there to support that work. But more importantly, there is a level of support, enthusiasm, and deep dedication to you as our public education leaders to get the job done from here. And I believe we can do that. It will require us building back in a different way than we have before, right? So we have to build that mental health infrastructure much more intentionally. We have to prepare, attract, support a new generation of talent into our classrooms, into our teaching profession in a way we haven't before. I'm confident we can get that done. I'm so excited about the work underway around teacher apprenticeships, for instance. We've seen in over 30 states now. When we started that, the First Lady brought us together, we had 1 state, 2 states. So I'm confident we can get that work done to redesign our middle and high schools so that they live up to the ambition and the potential and the excitement that our kids have for their future. We can do that. We can bring that career readiness alongside college readiness, not as an either or proposition, but as a both and proposition for our students. I think we can build those reading and math skills back better. We can find better ways to teach math. I know we've been talking about that as well, and that is a really important charge for our future. We have to be thinking about how we're engaging and supporting that instructional mastery in mathematics in a different way. But all of these things, all of these challenges we have, they're not beyond us. They're not beyond the talent we have in the system right now. So it's about supporting one another, learning from one another, building that collective resolve to get the job done.
Well, on behalf of all of those who are a part of this coalition, and all of those who are here in attendance, thank you. One of the things that I ponder quite often is where would we have been as a community and as a society if we hadn't had the 3 ESSER investments that we had to recover from the pandemic. I know we look at our performance and say, well, we're not where we were before, but where would we be had we not had those significant investments? And as the teacher shared a few moments ago as well, it made a difference. And we can all feel the palpable difference that it made in our everyday experiences in the lives of our children in our classrooms. And so on behalf of all of us and those of us in the room, thank you for joining us, but also thank you for the fight, and thank you for the investments that we've made in the country, that you've made in the country, and for those around. So please join me in thanking Roberto Rodríguez from the Department of Education for joining us this afternoon.
It's my honor. Thank you all very much.